Hello, I'm Michael, and if you're here, it's because you're as attracted to fear as I am. The story begins at the moment I reached the peak of my life. After a traumatic breakup and job loss, I felt like I was on a stable trajectory. Around that time, my friend Laura shared with me about a community she had found. It was a support group made up of individuals who, like me, were involved in various challenges. It was known as the Oasis Support and Assistance Group. He said it was a place of peace and recovery, exactly what I needed. The day I arrived, I remember a warm welcome. The headquarters were in an old mansion in the city center, surrounded by tall, majestic trees. The atmosphere was serene, and the individuals appeared to be extremely happy and full of purpose. Laura led me to Joaquin, the head of this community. He was a tall, attractive man with a soft but steady voice that inspired respect and confidence. The individual greeted me with a welcoming smile and a big hug. I felt an immediate connection with him, as if I could truly understand the suffering and disorientation he carried with him. The initial meetings went very smoothly. We gathered in a circle, sharing our experiences and listening to the educator's words of wisdom. He discussed the importance of community, discovering our authentic selves and inner peace. It all felt so reassuring and vital to my hurting spirit. A week after I signed up, I performed my first ritual. It was a pleasant night under the moonlight. We gathered around a lamp, and Joaquin led a sequence of songs and reflections. Although it's a bit unique, I felt a deep calm that I hadn't experienced in a long time. The members sang intensely, and the environment was filled with a vigorous and welcoming energy. Over time, I began to establish a stronger bond with the community. I acquired friends and started to participate more actively in daily activities. I felt integrated into something bigger, into a family that welcomed me and supported me unconditionally. When he joined the group, the adversities of the external environment seemed to disappear. Joaquin became a father figure in my existence. He was constantly ready to listen, direct, and advise. Your words acted as medicine for my soul. He was referring to the Lord of all, an entity that guided and protected us, as well as teaching us to see the light in the midst of the shadows. Although it initially seemed like a new concept to me, I began to understand it as an element of our convictions and traditions. As time progressed, several advanced members were sent to a farm near the city. It was an isolated and quite hidden place among forests and paths. The atmosphere was welcoming, conveying a sense of calm and tranquility. I realized it was the perfect place to leave everything behind. Thus, we begin our professional and cooperative life. Today we carried out work and stayed in this place. However, not everything was perfect. Occasionally, I noticed elements that bothered me, hidden glances between participants, whispered conversations that were interrupted when I approached. However, whenever uncertainties arose, Joaquin found a calm answer, always with an explanation that dispelled all fears. Weeks evolved into days and days into months. I finally felt at home, a place where I could recover and evolve independently. The collective became my home, and its members became my family. So he was unaware that, behind that appearance of tranquility and harmony, there was an obscure and hesitant darkness. However, in the first few days, she was overcome by the warm light of the initial enchantment, unable to see the shadows hidden in the darkest corners of that community. The initial interest of this group began to progressively wane, resulting in a focus of darkness that I had never experienced before. Everything started with minimal changes. Initially calm and contemplative, the rituals began to become more intense and rigorous. Joaquin's words became more authoritarian, and their effect on us became more suffocating. I remember one night in particular that marked the beginning of my discouragement. As usual, we gathered around the campfire, but this time Joaquin asked us to bring significant personal items. It would be appropriate to hand them over to the Dark Monarch. As the night progressed, the entire serene environment became oppressive. He experienced growing concern, but did not want to appear vulnerable to others. During the ritual, Joaquin began to utter an unusual language, and the group members watched him as if they were hypnotized. Therefore, something transformed in the air. The temperature dropped sharply, and a thick fog began to cover us. That was when I had my first experience with what Joaquin called the Lord of Shadows. It was a dark entity with no physical existence, but its influence could be seen everywhere. It seemed like his face was made up of vibrant shadows that curled in the darkness, a place where the light didn't reach or faded away like that. Joaquin bowed before the entity and instructed us to do the same. As I bowed, fear pierced my heart. They managed to resist the pressure of others and the fear of the unknown. But the most significant thing was the group of people strongly affected by the indignation. Gerard gave me the impression that he was really present. Joaquin's voice became a boom, announcing the arrival of the authentic leader of our community, an inferior being, a dark entity that he perceived as his mentor and advisor. According to Joaquin, the Shadow Monarch set his own rules. Do not worship other divine entities, do not cultivate external beliefs, and eliminate all emotions that corrode the spirit. The entity received veneration and devotion. Any gesture of love, hope, or faith in something different was severely penalized. The subsequent weeks symbolized a decrease in chaos and fear. The celebrations became darker and more violent. Human sacrifices gave rise to animal sacrifices. The nightly assemblies became rituals filled with applause and laments. The head of the ceremony, guided by the Shadow Lord, constantly requested more from us. One night, during a particularly unsettling ritual, I witnessed something I will never forget. A guy in a trance called the demon to manifest. The dark figure resurfaced, but now as a concrete entity in reality. This entity appeared to be an entity that captured light and heat from the surroundings, leaving a trail of intense coldness behind. The figure moved among us, producing terrifying sounds that struck fear into many people in the same way it feared. He was identified as a malevolent entity, a force that did not come from this world. Joaquin allowed himself to be subjugated by the entity, and his conduct became irregular and hostile. He affected several members of the collective, stating that we should purify ourselves through suffering and pain. Several of us experienced fear upon realizing the gravity of the circumstances that were occurring. No one dared to question Joaquin, not even his colleagues, who were also confused by the prevailing belief or reality. We were unaware of its consequences. We didn't know if it was just demonstrating its presence or if it had the ability to harm us. However, if that person did not do so, the sect members would do so without any mercy. The Oasis community, once a haven of peace, has become a place of fear. Violence and abuse were frequent in everyday life. The physical and psychological punishments intensified, and the control that Joaquin had over us was completely altered. I started planning my escape, but the fear of being caught and punished stopped me. I noticed that the Lord of Shadows watched my every move, constantly feeding my fear. The nights dragged on, filled with dark dreams and visions of the entity. One day, I noticed something that ultimately spurred me to take action. One of the group members tried to escape, but ended up being detained. He introduced himself to Joaquin and the group. The penalty was severe, and we were all forced to witness it. The unfortunate victim was attacked and tortured, and was finally sacrificed to the devil as a sacrifice. It seems that the entity fed on your suffering and pain, in a cruel act that I still haven't been able to forget. It was a terrible sacrifice that took place there, and no one deserves to die and suffer like that, all in an attempt to escape. There I understood that we are all subject to a troubled fate. That night, as we slept in the communal kitchens, I realized I needed to escape, no matter the cost. The evil that prevailed in the place and its representatives created an environment of insanity and suffering. He exposed his true identity, and I had no desire to become his next victim. Despite the fear, the need to survive and escape, that chaos intensified even more. He began my escape with firm determination, looking for the perfect moment to free me from the clutches of all those Blazinos. I was aware that it would be a fight against time and against the dark environment that surrounded us. After weeks of planning and facing the rising horror and violence, I finally had a moment to escape. I chose to carry out this in the middle of the night, a period when surveillance was reduced and darkness offered a degree of security. I invited 2 other members who, like me, were scared and ready to risk everything to leave. Carla and Lazaro. Both were victims of severe abuse and shared my desire to be free from that nightmare. We entered the shadows, gradually inching towards the edge of the forest that surrounded the headquarters. However, our expectations were promptly disappointed. One of the guards found us just a few meters from freedom. Before we had the opportunity to respond, we were detained and taken home, facing an even more intense nightmare. We fled to an underground chamber previously unknown to us. The smell was intolerable, a mixture of fungus, decay, and something darker that I couldn't identify. Upon entering, I was stunned with fear. The walls were impregnated with blood and feces. There were traces of humans scattered around the place. Some people were confined in handmade cages. They felt paralyzed, as if they had given up on life. We were forced to bow before a dark and gloomy throne. In that place, Joaquin waited with a malicious expression. the King of Darkness emerged, a being that radiated an atmosphere of genuine evil, a shadow that seemed to satisfy our fears. Joaquin began his song in that strange language, and everything it contained turned into chaos and crime. Carla and Ramos were the pioneers in sacrifice. Her screams left me desperate as to who would come next. I noticed how the entity was nourished by pain in a corner, gaining strength and revealing itself in reality, as it seemed that this body composed of shadows had become flesh. I was aware that my time was quickly approaching. I noticed that the end was near, and despair invaded my being. However, when Joaquin raised the knife to kill me, an intense noise woke up everyone present at the scene. A sudden explosion caused everyone to fall to the ground, accompanied by screams and the sound of military boots. The soldiers entered the room, heavily armed and determined. They were informed about the actions and deaths that were occurring in the group, and finally, an operation was carried out to dismantle the group. It was almost a miracle for me not to feel gratitude for what was occurring. The dispute was violent. The military fired shots at the members of the sect, and Joaquin, under the control of the Lord of Shadows, fought with greater than human strength. The entity, possibly at risk, became more aggressive, but was unable to resist the force of the projectiles and the determination of the military. In the end, Joaquin was just another individual. In the midst of the chaos, I managed to be released alongside the other prisoners. When the soldiers removed us from the chamber, I felt fresh air for the first time, something that reminded me of years of storms. Unusually, only a few months passed in that place, but for me, it felt like years. We didn't understand the concept of time and space. The residence was surrounded and eventually demolished. Joaquin died, crushed by the projectiles. However, the marks of that night would remain forever in my memory. However, the traumatic experience we experienced was intense. Research indicated that the sect had been operating for a long time, recruiting vulnerable people and subjecting them to cruelty. The complaints that resulted in the operation arose from apprehensive family members and former members who managed to escape. Currently, I live under the constant supervision of my mind, always alert and apprehensive that something similar could happen to me again. Freedom came at a high price, but survival gave me a second chance to restructure my life, even if the shadows of that place linger in the darkest places of my memory.